Okay, so I'd like to call the July 18th meeting of the New Canaan Board of Education to order. We have a full agenda this evening, so let's move on to approval of the minutes. If you could look at your places, you should have the minutes from our June 20th meeting, and when you've had a chance to look at them, if I could get a motion to approve those minutes. Do I have a motion? Sherry? A second? Hazel? All those in favor? Any opposed? Okay. Moving on to the agenda. You have in front of you the agenda for this evening's meeting. We have one amendment to the agenda that we'd like to make under the reports and recognition section of the agenda. We'd like to move the SACS update to the first item, and then the enrollment and staffing will be the second item. So could I get a motion to approve that amendment? Penny? Second? Sangeeta? All those in favor? Any opposed? Okay, so if I could also then get a motion to approve the amended agenda. Hazel? So moved. Second? Sherry? All those in favor? Okay, any opposed? All right. Moving on to comments from the public. To ensure the public's right to be heard, the board has set aside time during the meeting for public comments. 2 minutes will be allotted to each speaker and a maximum of 15 minutes to each subject. Do I have anyone who would like to speak this evening? Seeing no one, we will move on to reports and recognition. And the first item on our agenda is the SACS update from the SACS Building Committee project team. And I see Mr. Beal. Hello.
How are you? This is going to come in two parts. I'm going to give you a short financial summary, and then
Jim, can you speak into the microphone?
Then the O&G team. Is that on?
Yeah. Yes.
Okay. The O&G team will give you a overview of the construction process and where we are right now. If you will no doubt recall that when you approved this SACS project initially, you approved a budget of $18.6 million, and that is the budget that went forward to the town. It was passed by the Board of Finance and the Town Council, and that is the official budget from the point of view of bond issuing and so on. As we started into this project, we were not sure how much it was really going to cost because we didn't have the bids, all the things we don't know. And we were a little concerned some of the early estimates might be, were putting us a little higher than we wanted, so we did some value engineering. And we value engineered out about $1.3 million in costs. And another several hundred thousand we took out and moved into alternates that we could possibly live without if we had to. The good news is that thanks to the very good specifications, the work of O&G and the bidding process, and maybe a little serendipity, the bids came in very well. They came in quite favorable to us. The result is that we've reduced the budget estimate right now. It's a working budget. As we learn more, things will no doubt change. But right now we're working on a budget of $18.198 million, which is a little over $400,000 less than we initially had projected. And that includes $1.6 million in contingencies. That's money that isn't even allocated at this point. In addition, based on the latest re-estimate by O&G and our consulting team, we may be eligible for a little in excess of $2 million in state reimbursement. So if all those things were all to come true, it would be even further reduction. None of those things are promised right now. Contingencies are put there because they end up being needed. There are two kinds. There are construction contingencies, which are variables that come up that need to be sorted out in the construction process, and then things that may have been overlooked in the requirements process, or things that just have to, we decided just have to be added if some requirement that came up we didn't realize at the time. So we are right now in the start of construction, and ONG will describe that more to you later. We are working an EPA plan to finish the encapsulation and abatement and encapsulation of the PCBs in the auditorium and a couple of other places. So that's underway as we speak. I was over there this morning, and there's certain areas, few areas where they're working where are under negative pressure. Any dust or anything is being blown out, and everything is going according to plan right now. So that is the financial report, and you're going to get more of a construction phasing report from ONG in just a minute. Is there any questions or anything you'd like to ask about this? Thank you.
Just one clarification. When we're under negative air, any air that goes out from the school goes through filters before it enters the atmosphere.
Yeah, outside atmosphere, right.
Outside
It gets
atmosphere.
out, exit the school,
To
right.
make that
Right.
crystal clear.
And just adding to that, the other piece of that is while any kind of remediation is occurring at the school, it is closed to students, anyone under the age of 18.
Right. The plan is to get that work completed before before the August period ends, when we can do construction and when they start preparing the school for the students. Okay, so I would like to introduce Laurel Burgess and Nelson Reese.
I did not marry Steve.
Purcell. We have a Purcell and a Burgess. Anyway, Laurel Purcell from ONG. Just a comment, I was going to make a comment about the benefits that the construction management process has added for us. I think
Jim, speak into the mic first.
I think the fact that we had such good bids was very much influenced by using the construction manager process, and Laurel sort of headed that activity, so she's, kudos to her.
Thank you very much, Jim. All right, it's a pleasure to be here before you. Laurel Purcell again with ONG Industries, and I'm going to kind of walk through our program. You guys have, I don't know if you want to look at the screen or if you want to follow along paper-wise. Just to let you know, ONG has done construction management on over 220 schools in the state of Connecticut, so we're well-versed in projects such as yours, and especially working on projects where schools are occupied. So the way that we staff our projects is we have a project executive, and the project executive assigned to your project is Mark Jeffco. He was the project manager on the new Canaan High School project that was down here. I perform the pre-construction services, and pretty much my role is complete as of this moment. Then what we do is we turn it over to a field staff, a project manager and a superintendent who are assigned to your project full-time. These are the only projects that they work on when they're working for you. So Nelson is here tonight, and he's going to talk to you about the second portion of this. And then Roger Johnson is our superintendent. He's there at the site all day, and if anybody from the school has any issues, I'm sure there's direct communication directly to him to make sure that he corrects any sort of situations. And he'll have more of a role, obviously, when everybody comes back to school. All right, so he's in charge of keeping control of the site, making sure that the contractors understand where they're supposed to be working, and making sure that the school understands that if they suspect anybody that's not where they belong, then they just call him. All right, so the next item is really the areas of work where we will be within the building, and you can tell that we're in many different areas. So what I'll do is I'll go to the colored phasing because it's easier to see it there. So if anybody's been by the school, you see that we've started digging, we've set our trailers up. We're starting with the new addition, and that will be online for next fall, okay? That's a 2-story addition, and there's also going to be what's called a flex classroom. So that is part of this project. We'll be installing that. At the same time, we've started working on the auditorium. So that still had a little more remediation to go. So we're working on that. We got a little more selective demolition, and then we'll be bringing that online in the spring. There's 2 existing classrooms. You can see on the colored photo that's kind of striped. These are a couple of classrooms that we're enveloping them, if everybody can see what I'm talking about. It's that square right there, okay? So we're building around it, and we had to take precautions of how do you do that. You were blocking off their windows. So we had to make sure that this summer we get ventilation on in those rooms. So we'll be doing some work this summer, but we'll be finishing it next summer. We're going to be converting the existing corals and the existing art rooms into band rooms. Those are the larger areas. Once we've got the addition underway, we know that we're going to be turning over those spaces. At that point, we'll start renovating those other areas. And then we have just the front, they call it the music area, where we're just giving it some sound treatment. We'll be doing that next summer. So that's basically the project in a nutshell. So you can see the overall time frame. We started this summer, and we'll be done next fall overall. And I believe with that, I'm going to turn it over to Nelson to talk about controls. So another part of my job, just before I turn it over, is coming up with the construction controls. We have to identify for the contractors where partitions are going to be, so that everybody knows how they're going to get access to these other construction work areas. So that's part of what I did as well. And with that, I'll turn over to Nelson.
Good evening, board members. It's a pleasure to be here. As far as controls, we set up a containment area, excuse me. Where's the plan?
It's this red. It's the red. The red.
Okay. We set up temporary walls on this back corridor that was abated last week. We actually took air samples over the weekend. We're waiting for the results. We have the negative air containment running along this corridor. And before we actually built the walls, we laid it out on the floor for everybody to see where they were actually located. So there's going to be a contractor entrance over here. Also abatement work. We built temporary walls over on the main entrance lobby area, and they did some mezzanine work here last week as well. That work is actually going along fairly well, and within a few weeks the abatement will be done. In the meantime, the same trade contractor is doing the demolition work, and we started removing, actually today we removed these windows and boarded them up. And this stairwell that comes down, they're going to start demolition on that actually this week. And we cut and made safe the electrical, mechanical late last week. So as far as controls, we've isolated the work areas. The whole site is contained with fence, and now that the screen fence is up, the job site is barely visible with the fencing. And I'll touch upon, come before the school is in session, this is a second floor area B, where the new addition, this is going to be the future courtyard. So we're going to open up this window and put a door there, and there's going to be an egress stair going along the roof with a secure stair tower. You'll be able to egress out, but you won't be able to come back in. So that will be done in the next few weeks. By the middle of August, that will be complete. So overall, before school is in session, we'll have this sidewalk back in place to provide access for the students. This egress will be installed with a door. These windows, the temporary fan coil unit that provides fresh air, will be installed in the classroom itself above ceiling, and we have to do a little bit of roof work there as well. These are the site controls. As you could see, the layout of the fencing and the contractor parking area. And we installed the fence around the trees, around the drip line of the trees to protect the trees. So overall, that's it's a small work site, but we have a staging area in this area that we're able to stockpile some material that they need to use, because right now they're actually going to be working on this detention. There's going to be a detention pond, or not a pond, but a detention system over here, and they're working on the utility lines that run in this direction, and they're going to be working on the water line. So this parking lot here, if you go to the job site, it's a lot of dirt, but by the school, once school's back in session, that will be paved, and the bus loop will be back in service. As far as on work that's taken place in upcoming work, the site work, we've done all the site prep as far as stripping the topsoil and getting down to subgrade, fencing and erosion controls. We did the temporary parking, temporary access. There's a man gate for the contractors to use in and out of that parking area. Site utility has started, like I've mentioned, and the excavation for the new stormwater detention system. Demolition started last week with building the abatement containment areas, and the abatement is ongoing in the auditorium, and the encapsulation will be done around mid-August, but before, actually that doesn't really need to take place before school, but all the abatement work will be done before school, but the encapsulation, we're trying to do it a little bit ahead of time. And also that back corridor that I was talking about, which is this corridor, that we did that last week, and we're just waiting for the air samples to come back. Concrete, we're a little bit ahead of schedule with the concrete. We pushed it to August 1st, which is a good thing. The steel, which I didn't put in the slide, the steel, the shop drawings are in the review process, and steel is scheduled to start the end of September, early October. But there's a fabrication time once the shop drawings are reviewed and approved. It's about roughly 40 days, but hopefully we can better that time. Masonry, infills, the windows that we took out on those two classrooms and the principal's office in this area, those will be blocked up late this week, early next week. By the end of July, those windows will be, there's going to be a CMU block wall that closes up those windows. That's the purpose of the fan coil unit, to provide fresh air to the classrooms. And drywall, interior temporary partition work in corridor side areas A and B. In area B, which is this area, we built temporary partition to seal off this corridor while we're demoing it out. So that's already built. On the first floor, this is actually a picture of the second floor, but the same thing for the first floor. A few pictures of the job site, the fence with a screen mesh. They're a little bit hard to see on the photos here, but here's a photo of the utility work from the utility work that took place last week for the drainage, and another photo of on the left side of this bottom photo. That's the contractor parking area and the front entrance, and a photo from South Ave showing the silt, or the fence working its way around the trees. So overall, the project is on schedule. We're on time. Hopefully we could pick up some time with certain areas, and for those other times that we might fall behind. But with picking up some time on the concrete, we have a little bit of a buffer. And that being said, I don't know. Can open it up to questions, or?
Okay, thank you. Thank you. I know we're all excited to see the progress to date, and why don't I open it up to the board for questions? Anyone have any questions? Sherry?
It's a great presentation, and it's exciting to see the progress, although it's dirt, but it's exciting to see the dirt. I wanted to clarify, on the auditorium, you mentioned that it would be online in the spring of 2017. So can you just remind me, does that mean with seats, when is it usable for students?
It will be turned over in late spring, so it would be, it'd be ready to be used. So late spring, if you have summer events that take place in the auditorium, I guess you can use it at that point in time. I don't think it will be ready for students' 2016, 2017 session, but it's scheduled for late May.
Okay, we should at least schedule a party for the current rising 8th grade class. Since they've only gotten 1 year of the auditorium. And then my other question is, the photo for the contractor access to the auditorium, can you just explain how you're going to control access to that? It looks like you're putting a new door to allow contractor access.
Yeah.
This plan was actually worked very closely with Jim, and he's very familiar with the layout of the walls.
Let me borrow your pointer for that, which is the red one.
It's the red one there.
The way this is
Jim,
going
come
to
to
work
that
is
microphone.
that,
Jim, you got to come to
Use
the
the microphone.
the way this is going to work is actually pretty neat. This corridor here is only going to be used by contractors, and students are not going to be allowed there except for fire. It's going to be a fire exit only. There exists right now a set of doors right here. They're going to be marked fire exit. There's a new door is being installed right here that's also going to be marked fire exit. This art room, you enter this way, but it has its own fire exit right here. So basically, the fire marshals reviewed this plan, and it does two things for us. It gives the contractors free access to the auditorium so they can work on it without constraint during the school day, but it also meets all the fire exit requirements. So it's a really neat solution to the problem. Does that answer your question?
It does in part. So, but you're adding a new external door there? I mean, are they accessing that corridor through this new external door? Is that a new door?
No, from the outside, the door's there already. That's door.
Okay, so-
The only door there is one to keep students from wandering into the construction area.
So how do the contractors get into that corridor? It's a locked door how do we control
They
access?
come in
and
from the
then-
outside, and they come into the auditorium right there. There's a door in the auditorium right there. So that's their entrance.
So they have a key card or a swipe card or something that,
There's a system for security of contractors, which they all will be wearing, they've all gone through a background check, and they will all be wearing identifying helmets. So it will be open for them to come and go in that corridor, which is dedicated to them. Students will not be in that corridor.
okay. So I know I guess I'm thinking ahead to some teenager who, discovers this open door, which grants open access to our school. So I'm just wondering about the security protocols.
I'll leave that to Brian and Joanne, who will tell me what they're going to do about the outside door. It's a regular outside door, so it will have whatever security an outside door has.
And I guess I would follow on, because not only, teenagers, if.
Or just
if
anyone.
Yes.
Sure. Well,
And there are options that we can discuss, such as rekeying that door and having just, a few folks with O&G with that key, so that they would be controlling access in and out of that corridor. It is something that certainly supplies and things would have to pass through that corridor, but, the workers, when they're in the auditorium, will be doing the work in there. The students will not be in the corridor at all, and on the outside of the door, we'll make sure that it's very clearly marked that the purpose of that, for that door is for construction access only. But I think probably putting a different core in that door, controlling access to that key, is probably the best way to approach doing this.
and there's going to be O&G on-site management. As was pointed out earlier, Roger Johnson's going to be, most of the time when he's not here, somebody else from O&G will be here. So they will have on-site management as well.
Yeah, so and then when we're not using the door for access on weekends, off hours, whatever, it would be locked and secured that way, for sure.
Other questions? Anyone? Okay. All right, well, thank you very much.
I have one quick question, I'm
Okay.
sorry. Just in a similar vein, There's the fencing outside now with different gates for parking, different access into the sites. What are the safeguards in place to be sure at the end of the workday, those gates are locked and it's secure? Because we're in a middle school in the middle of town, and there's a lot of curiosity about this, and we just want to be sure we have the right protocols in place around that.
Yes, the last person on the job site, be it myself or Roger Johnson, we go through the whole job site and make sure it's secure. Each gate we had it just wired shut, but we got combination locks with a specific combination that sometimes a piece of equipment has to be fueled from our facility, so they have a combination lock, but it's limited as far as who has that. We have it in the trailer, and we're going to be sharing it with the school staff in case, for whatever reason, would have to access it off hours. We also have emergency lists that in case something did happen, we would be on site, as well as the trade contractors. But the site is, at night, we do our rounds, and we lock it up. The school, Roger has been communicating with the staff as far as the work that goes in there in locking the door, but he has been locking the door at the end of the day and the gates as well.
I just had one follow-on to that. So are your summer hours different than what will be going on during the school year? I know they're pushing, noon to 8 during the school year, and then during the week. Right now, are you working more traditional hours, or?
It's 7 to 3:30.
7 to 3:30.
Yes.
So those security protocols that you discussed about the gates, are you starting those now? Are you?
They started last week.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right. Any other questions? Okay. All right, thank you very much.
It's very exciting to have all this work getting going. Thank you again, Jim, Penny, Ken, thank you for coming tonight. Also on the Sachs Building Committee. It is very exciting, made us all a little nervous when we saw the big piles of dirt showing up around Sachs, and even had some questions about why are we digging here or there, and isn't the addition going over there? And as it all comes together, it's wonderful to hear that we're on schedule, which is, of course, one of the biggest issues. And certainly the budget is good news as well. So we're off to a great start. Thanks to everybody's hard work.
And just one point, the noon to 8 is what we're starting with in the fall. As the winter hours shift to get more daylight working hours, we'll be in discussions with the school about, we'll probably shift those hours a little bit so that we aren't working in the dark.
Yeah.
But that will all evolve as we get further into the project.
Towards October, the daylight, we don't have 8 o'clock daylight. There is work that could take place in the school that wouldn't be visible from the outside, but those winter hours help in the productivity of the overall work. But as far as summer hours, they are 7 to 3:30. You'll see gates open after 3:30 when I choose to work a little bit later and working on paperwork, but in general, after 4 o'clock, those gates will be closed.
I would encourage in the discussions of the working hours as the daylight wanes, maybe evaluating, if there's any external light sources or things that we can utilize that would allow, the project to continue in the evening. I think, a lot of parents have been expressing a desire to have the least amount of disruption during the school day. So if there's a cost-effective way to do that, I think we should explore it and look into that. So, okay. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Okay, moving on to the enrollment and staffing update with Mr. Cass.
Thank you. No problem. In your places, I put 2 handouts. One is, they should both look familiar to you. First one I want to review is on the full district enrollment, where it lists the elementary enrollment, Sachs Middle School enrollment, New Canaan High School. So as always, we've been monitoring student enrollment very carefully in meetings each week. So the way that I always look at this is if school started tomorrow, there'd be 1,619 students at the elementary level, which is up 2 from even last week. Sachs Middle School would start with 1,364. That's up 6 from just last week. The high school at 1,269 is the same as last week. So the total enrollment of 4,252 is where we are as of today. The other sheet that I put in your place looks at just the elementary schools, the 3 elementary schools, and the class size guidelines and the enrollment there. So what I want to talk a little bit about here is, the last time I presented this, we were looking at 4 sections that were at or approaching the class size guidelines. Since numbers had gone over significantly in grade 2 at South School, you see that we have added 1 teacher to reduce the sections, to reduce the enrollment and class sizes at South School grade 2. So that is now an issue that is resolved. The 3 that we're really looking at very closely are at East School kindergarten and first grade, and the kindergarten at West School. Let me tell you where we are there. We have been meeting with the elementary principals weekly, and we do have another meeting this week and one more next week. We expect that within these 2 meetings, we should finalize what these numbers look like and make some decisions around adding teachers. I can assure you that principals have been vetting candidates, and the candidate issue will not be an issue as far as we are concerned. We'll still be able to get terrific candidates at the elementary level, waiting even a week or 2 weeks. The kindergarten at East at 102 and at first grade 103, the reason we haven't kind of made those changes yet is that there are still folks that have not completed the full registration process. Some are waiting for house closings, some are waiting, are moving. So we weren't ready unless we had the actual 102 or 104, 3 kids, to make that change yet. We're having all of these folks contacted over this last week, and we're hoping that we will be able to figure out exactly where we are in terms of the numbers and make some decisions over these next 2 weeks. So that's where we are with the numbers. The other update I wanted to talk a little bit about is our staffing. We've been, principals have been busy hiring all summer long. We have added, to date, 31 teachers. 31 teachers new to the district in all different areas: art, family consumer science, English language arts, social studies. We added a student support coordinator, 3 library media specialists, a social worker, a STEM teacher, high school English teacher, physical education and health teacher, earth science, math, tech integrator, 2 psychologists, and 1 district nursing supervisor. So 31 teachers hired to date, 2 administrators that you know about, our 2 special education administrators. We added the district nursing supervisor just last week. We also added 1 school nurse at the high school. We've added 4 teacher assistants and 8 interns. Total number of hires to date is now at 47. That's where we are.
Okay. Thank you, Gary. I'll open it up to the board with any questions for Gary on the enrollment and staffing. Anyone have any questions? Okay. I just had one, just as far as the first grade enrollment, or I guess it was, oh, no, I'm sorry. You know what, never mind. I thought I was reading across incorrectly, so my question's taken care of.
Thank you.
Anyone else? Okay. Thank you, Gary. Okay. So moving on, the next item in our reports and recognition is our FERPA and data privacy update with Mr. Tom Mooney, from Shipman and Goodwin. Hello, Tom. It's good to see you.
Sure, and as Tom gets himself organized a little bit there, I'll just begin by, just speaking about our invitation to Tom tonight to share with us information about the new student data privacy legislation that was recently approved and signed into law by Governor Malloy. Given the significance of that legislation and the importance of, I think, the board's and public's understanding of FERPA and student data privacy, we thought it'd be a good idea for Tom to join the board tonight to give a brief overview of the legislation and its impact on a school district, on the Board of Education. It is something that we've begun learning about, reading about. There was a webinar that I know Dr. Carenti attended along with a few other folks in our district to learn more about it. But it is something that has been a topic of interest for the Board of Education in the past, and thought that it'd be a good topic for us this evening. And who better to share information with us than Attorney Mooney, who will also be with us later in the agenda for our executive session as we discuss upcoming negotiations.
Good evening. Good evening. I brought copies of the law because I know you're an intellectually curious group, as well as an overview that I adapted from our legislative update, supplemented it somewhat. And it's going to be quite a challenge to give a, quote, brief overview of this law because it's quite complicated, but I will do my best to give you that overview, but then be prepared to answer your questions. And in fact, in my written overview, which I'll pass out momentarily, I pose several questions that might be helpful for you to think about and eventually act on as a Board of Education. So I'll just pass that out.
Great. Thank you, Tom.
Thank you, Spencer. Thank you.
Thank you. Let me just start by setting the stage while that's coming around. And I always, I teach school law at UConn, and I'm always leery of passing something out and then expecting people to listen. So what I'd like to do is walk you through the written material and try and have this be a conversation between us, but it is very tempting to read ahead. This new law supplements a law that's been on the books since 1974. And there's a federal law, I'm sure you've heard of FERPA. And FERPA has two major thrusts. One is to give students access to student information and to assure that personally identifiable student information is kept confidential, subject to a number of specified exceptions, such as health and safety emergencies, compliance with a subpoena, access by a person with a legitimate pedagogical interest, and so on. So what this new law does is lays over FERPA, which is a federal law, and imposes new requirements on boards of education to preserve the confidentiality of student data. And in the materials, and I do want you to go along with me on this, Section 1 of the law, and I'm going to be looking more at my overview, but I have the law here as well, and sometimes we're going to look directly at the law because there are some fundamental ambiguities in the law that need to be teased out. And to cut to the end, the last section of this new law it creates a task force to look at it and its implications. So I think what the General Assembly was acknowledging is that it didn't have all the answers. It identified a problem and was rather expansive in how it addressed the problem, but realizes that that's not the final word, and this task force will be reporting back to the public on prior to January 1 of next year. So that's quite an ambitious timetable for that task force to address these issues. The basic concept here is that school districts, as is permitted by FERPA, share student information with third parties. And this new law defines third parties as consultants. I typed this myself, and so I immediately see a problem. That should be contractor in the first bullet. I added the definitions. So contractor is the overarching definition, and a contractor is a third party who gets student information. And they fall into two categories. The categories are a consultant or an operator. A consultant is what we traditionally would deal with under FERPA. For example, I'm a consultant. I often advise school districts on matters that involve student information. And FERPA specifically authorizes me to have that information and imposes upon me the further obligation not to use that information further or share it with third parties. And so that's one person or one entity that falls under the contractor definition. The other is operator, and that's a newer concept. And the operator, as is defined here, is a person who operates an internet website, online service, or mobile application with actual knowledge that such site, service, or application is used for school purposes and collects, maintains, or uses student data. And drawing that line will be one of the challenges under the new law, because the law also specifies that people who operate websites, online services, or mobile applications for the public in general are not covered by this law. So it's a question of deciding who's an operator because their product is marketed for and designed for school officials, for school use, I should say. So those are the two categories of contractor that are addressed in the law. And then there are other definitions that reach beyond FERPA, because FERPA talks about student records maintained concerning a particular student. Under this new law, pursuant to technology, students are going to be sharing information themselves. And this new law addresses that circumstance as well. Fundamental to the FERPA definition of a school record, it has to be maintained by the school district. Under this new law, there are going to be circumstances where students generate information, or pursuant to an assignment, they're on a mobile app or at a website, and they're going to be sharing information that wouldn't necessarily even be maintained by the school district, but nonetheless, under this new law, that information is subject to the protections of the law. And the definitions distinguish between student information, which is typically those pieces of information that are shared with operators, and then student records, which is the more traditional definition that is also found under FERPA. And then we have this new concept as well of student-generated content, which is subject to these protections. There are two basic requirements under the law. The first is that school boards have contracts with anyone who's a contractor, that is either a consultant or an operator, and those contracts are subject to 10 different specific requirements. And it's a new one on me, but in this new law it says that if you don't have those particular requirements in the contract with the contractor dealing with student data, then the contract is void. So it's a very significant requirement that not only school districts, but contractors have to take seriously. One of the challenges is going to be chasing down all the entities who may be considered contractors. The big ones are not going to be a big deal. You know, do you use Power School, for
We do.
example? Yeah, that would be, Power School would be an operator, and that's easy. What's not so easy is figuring out all the different organizations that operate, websites that your students access it pursuant to their schoolwork, mobile apps. You know, I'll simply acknowledge that at my age and stage, I have no idea of all the different potential apps and their uses for students and their education, and some of these are going to be student-found and used, and some of them are going to be teacher-found and recommended, and some of them are going to be teacher-found and assigned. But these, finding all of those contractors, sitting them down, and making sure that they agree to a contract prior to October 1st, 2016. That's the other important piece to keep in mind. We're now in July. By October 1, 2016, this requirement will be effective. All contracts entered into on or after that date will be subject to these requirements. Contracts that have been entered into already will not. But you know, contracts are renewed, so it's going to catch up with everyone. What I have in the overview is some of the requirements that these contracts must include. And this is on page 2, and it's the bulleted list. The contract, and by the way, my law firm is worried about this. Well, I should say aware of it. We're not worried, but we're going to have to come up with contracts with all our school district clients that lay out our acceptance of these terms. And the most relevant terms for the sake of this discussion this evening are listed in the bullets here. A statement that student data is not the property of or under the control of the contractor. A provision by which a Board of Ed may request the deletion of data in possession of the contractor. This is going to be a challenging one. Procedures by which a student or parent may review personally identifiable information contained in such student data and correct any erroneous information. That's not an arguable premise. The practical issue of finding all of these different arrangements whereby students use electronic means to pursue their studies, and assuring that each of these mobile apps, each of these websites have procedures whereby parents or students can present their concern and have that concern be adjudicated. All it says is that to provide an opportunity to correct erroneous data. Who decides and how that's all going to play out is, I hope the task force figures that out for us. It goes on that we all contractors have to assure through this contract that we will ensure the security and confidentiality of student data. We must have procedures by which we notify the Board of Ed when there's been an unauthorized release, disclosure, or acquisition, which we will be referring to as a breach of the confidentiality requirement. A statement that the student information, student records, or student-generated content will not be retained or available to the contractor upon completion of the contracted services unless a student, parent, or guardian make a separate agreement with that typically operator. Now we're in the internet world where they maintain, the operator would maintain the data through an agreement with the particular student or parent as a repository for student-generated content. So that's the exception to that. And finally, an attestation that the contractor must abide by the Family Educational Rights and Privacy Act. And as I mentioned, any contract entered into after October 1st is void if it does not contain these provisions. There is provision for curing defect. In other words, we identify a circumstance, we go to the contractor, we may have a contract, and we may then have to say, for this to continue, you need to agree to the following. And we'll see how that goes. Then Section 2 of the law also imposes certain requirements on contractors to maintain the security of student information, and they use as a benchmark, they make reference to certain guidance that's been issued pursuant to the HIPAA law, for the confidentiality of health information. So there's certain standards of care that have been promulgated, and this law by reference incorporates those requirements. Now we come to one of the questions. One of the questions is, okay, so we have these contracts, and now within 5 days, 5 business days of entering into this contract with whomever, we have to notify students and parents affected by the contract of the existence of the contract and certain elements of the contract, and we have to post that notice on the website. When we are serve as board counsel, and a month from now, we may have access to student data because there's an expulsion hearing. And we receive that information in our role as counsel, either to the Board of Ed or to the administration. We'll contemplate that circumstance in the contract and the promises we make pursuant to the statute. The question is, what students are affected by that contract? Is it global? Do we notify, and this just, my law firm's just one little example, but do we just, Power School, do we just have this list and then shoot that out to everybody? The practical rollout of this is going to be a challenge, but those are some, I just want to be clear. Acting in good faith, looking at the law, understanding its intentions, and doing our best is all we can do. I'm not trying to make this be a scaring, trying to frighten you about this. I just want to be practical about you as the board overseeing the operation of the district, being aware of these obligations and supportive of and help give direction to the administration as the administration wrestles through these requirements. So we're not quite sure how, who is or is not affected by a particular contract and how what the best approach will be in terms of notifying parents. But we get here then to one of the ambiguities in the law that I just want to draw to your attention, and on page 7 of 14 of the statute, we see the actual statutory language that I've been describing. We have these contracts, now we have to give notice to students and their parents who are affected by the contract. So at the top of the page, you see the Board of Ed shall, quote, provide electronic notice to any student and the parent or legal guardian of a student affected by the contract. The notice shall, and then it explains what shall be in the notice, period. Next sentence, last sentence of the section. The local or regional Board of Education shall post such notice and the contract on the board's internet website. So the question is posting on the website compliance with the law, or do we have to figure out who's affected and give them individual notice and post it on the website. And we'll figure it out. But right now, just as an aside, I guess Dr. Correnti listened in on that web. I did too over the weekend. When I heard I was talking about this, I figured I better try to understand this new law, so I did too. And there were 3 presenters, and over the weekend when I was getting my thoughts together, I asked the 3 presenters whether these are 2 requirements or 1 requirement. And the vote was 2 to 1. And these are, they spent a lot of time trying to figure this all out. So we just don't know. There are a lot of uncertainties in the law. Moving on with the outline, there are, in Section 3 of the statute, the law imposes numerous requirements for operators of websites, and this is where this question comes up: what applications, what websites are going to be part of the, are going to be covered by the obligation? Because at the end of the paragraph that starts Section 3, I've just quoted the law. It does nothing, it clarifies that these restrictions do not apply to internet websites designed and marketed for use by individuals generally. I need to clarify that. Even if at the same time, the same logon credentials might give you access to an application that is in fact used for school purposes. So my concern is a teacher assigned something. Is that something that we're going to have to track down? So that's another question under the law. Then we get to the second major requirement under the law. And I think this, I was not part of the legislation history, and so I would defer to others to explain the underlying motivation. But I think that issues of breach and being aware that information had been inappropriately shared was a major consideration, because in the legislation, there's quite a bit on that. So if there is an unauthorized breach, and the law differentiates between student information on the one hand and student records on the other, student information being information that is shared with an operator, a website, or a mobile app. In the case of student information, the contractor, or in this case, operator, has 30 days to inform the Board of Education of the breach. And the Board of Education has 48 hours thereafter to notify the affected students. And again, we have definitional issues, who is affected by a particular breach, and so on. One of the things that my colleagues during this webinar suggested, and I think it's very appropriate, is that there be, through the contract process, procedures for notifying us even before a breach is authentic or validated, that we have some advance notice, and that operators or consultants not take the full 30 days. The statute sets a 30-day maximum period. We have the right, in looking to make these contracts, to seek a shorter period of time, because if there's a breach, we're all concerned, and we want to be able to take action sooner than necessarily 30 days in the case of student information, or the law provides for 60 days that the contractor, in cases of student records or directory information, 60 days before they absolutely must tell us. So that's another issue for discussion with our contractors, because we're not going to want to have them looking at something for 60 days, particularly when we only have 48 hours once they tell us to notify parents. And again, we have the same question under the statute. because it's a similar construct. That is, we notify the affected students and parents, and then without saying "and," but new sentence, the law says, the board shall post such notice on the district website. So we have to be clear in public about breaches. Contractors have to tell us, and we have to post that on the district website. What is unclear right now is how we define affected by the breach and how we notify those students and those parents. So that's the other major requirement. So I don't want to come across as, unsympathetic to the underlying policy concerns that led the statute to be passed. But in passing this law, the General Assembly presented some significant challenges to boards of education. And in closing on the general overview, but I'm happy to answer questions as may be helpful, I listed some of the questions that I had as I was preparing this. And I've talked about some of them. How do we determine whether a contract affects the students? How do we inform them? Is posting enough? Can we shorten the period? Just as part of my effort to learn about this, some of you may know I write a column for the School Boards Journal about the Nutmeg Board of Education. So what better way to learn about something than to write my column over the weekend about student data breaches? And in the scenario I came up with, the district became aware of the breach through social media. In other words, kid broke in to Power School, changed a bunch of grades, and then on social media it was being discussed. So they went and found out that in fact there had been a breach, but the law imposes the obligation on the contractor to tell us, and then once the contractor has told us, then we have that 48-hour period to notify parents affected by the students and parents affected by the breach and to post something on the website. We're just not sure. In my case, I guess Nutmeg should tell the contractor that they discovered a breach. The contractor should investigate and then come back and respond, and it would be that response that would then trigger the 48-hour window for notifying the students and parents. One of the more challenging issues here is going to be getting everyone on board and aware of this, because you prize creativity and originality, for teachers to go out and innovate and find this or find that, to provide resources to their students. And there is some question in my mind whether everything a teacher even mentions is going to be subject to this requirement. I just don't know. But as this bullet sets forth, what new protocols will be necessary before a teacher can assign or ask students to use an internet website, online service, or mobile application? Because of this ongoing responsibility we have to have contracts with all these people. And so it's going to be important to educate staff, but also to devise appropriate protocols so that we don't get into inadvertent violations of this new law. And the law doesn't speak to liability at all, and I'm not sure whether whether and what liability might be boards of ed may be exposed to. Just by way of side comment, 2002, the United States Supreme Court decided that there is no private right of action for FERPA violations. And when the General Assembly wrote our bullying statute in 2011, they provided for immunity from suit if you have a bullying policy. There is no such provision here, and I don't know whether and what potential liability may arise. And again, we're all learning. This is very new. And finally, for you to consider is what will be the cost in time and money of complying with this new mandate. So that's an overview of the law. I hope it was helpful, and I'm happy to answer any questions. It was enlightening and inspiring, I'm sure. Do you have any questions that I might answer?
Well, thank you, Tom. As always, your presentations are very informative and helpful. So I have one quick question. I'll have more, but I want to open it up to the board. But my first question is really, as I was following this law, I was under the impression that the task force work was going to happen first, and then the law would be implemented. But I'm a little confused about the logistics of a law being in effect and then a task force. So the law comes in effect in October of this year, which is
Right.
not very far away. And then there's all kinds of confusion and possible issues with it. And we all want data privacy for our kids. But, so we have a law that's impacted in October of this year, and the task force work is due in January. So I'm a little confused about the charge of the task force. I mean, could the task force negate some of the work we're doing as a district? So we gear up and we try to comply with all these mandates that, by the way, are unfunded again. And then all of a sudden they change it. The task force says, oh, well, that's ridiculous. We can't do that. And so then New Canaan Board of Ed says, well, wait a second. We just geared up for that and we're trying to comply with it. So if you could kind of talk through that, and then I'll open it up to the board for further questions.
Well, we have a current obligation to comply with the law, which is in effect, and we have until October 1st to have contracts with everyone. The task force, the good news is that they're required to report back promptly by no later than January 1st, 2017. But the charge of the task force is set out in Section 5 of the statute, which begins on page 12, is to, quote, study issues related to student data privacy, including but not limited to, and then they have a series of issues that the task force is charged with looking at. When a parent may reasonably or appropriately request the deletion of student information, student records, or student-generated content, means of providing notice to parents when a student uses an internet website, online service, or mobile application for instructional purposes, reasonable penalties for violating provisions of sections 1 to 4, which deal with the contract requirement and the notification of breach requirement. Strategies in effect in other states that ensure school employees are trained in data security handling, compliance, and best practices. That gets to my point earlier about making sure that staff is aware of these obligations. Use of an administrative hearing process designed to provide legal recourse to students and parents aggrieved by any violation, and so on. And so those are that's the charge to the task force, including, quote, at the end, any other issue involving student data security that the task force deems relevant. So, I think the practicalities of time will limit what this task force can do. I think given the law and its importance and the implementation questions, the task force can provide a very important assistance to boards of education, but we're going to have to do our best. Then the task force will report, and it will simply do that. The task force does not have the authority to enact law or impose new requirements or excuse requirements. The very end of the statute says, no later than January 1st, 2017, the task force shall submit a report on its findings and recommendations to the General Assembly, and then it goes out of business. So any changes in the law would come through the recommendations and then legislative action.
So what you're saying is the task force could make recommendations and the General Assembly could decide not to act on any of them, and the law would just stay as it is.
The General Assembly will decide what, if any, changes to make in this law after receiving the task force report.
Okay.
And Tom, just on the task force question, I'm sorry.
Yeah, no.
And you may not know the answer to this, which I would understand why. But it does say on C, the last page, 14 of 14, all appointments to the task force shall be made not later than 30 days after the effective date of this section. And then the bottom, it says that this section was approved June 9th. So do you know, are you aware of if the task force has been appointed? I would assume it has been, given the strict date timeline on this.
I don't know.
Yeah, I wouldn't expect.
I was at a CABE function, and they said that CABE mentioned they have an appointment to the task force, but that was it.
A good start. Good.
Can I open it up to questions? Penny?
Well, law firms for boards of education certainly aren't going to be going out of business anytime soon. But like I say, lots and lots of questions. The first two that come to mind are, one, with respect to this task force, is there any organized move by boards of education to have questions that we would have submitted to the task force so that they can answer it in some fashion? Because if the last section was any other provision that are deemed relevant.
Right.
I'm thinking one of the things that boards of education could say is that there should be, like as in FERPA, there should be an added provision that there's no private right of action. That might be something that we as a Board of Education and other boards of education might want to, put out there. So that's one question. Is there any effort afoot to do that? And I have
This
that
is
question.
just so new that I'm not sure what CABE has done other than say there's this new law. But that's an excellent idea. As I was going through it and thinking of my questions, I was thinking, well, gee, maybe I should send these to Patrice McCarthy, who's the general counsel at CABE. But these are just a few. I think that boards of ed and administrators who have to look at this law and think about the practical reality may have some very important questions to ask, and it would be helpful to share them with the task force.
So it would just strike me that it might be worth our while to talk to similar school districts and perhaps engage a firm to make some comments or make comments ourselves on that, over the summer, and pretty rapidly if their delivery date is January 1st.
And generally speaking, CABE has been very responsive to information, to feedback from boards of education, from administrators, certainly CAPS as well, around legislation and things like this. They're very good at sort of collecting the information and bringing it forward for consideration and discussion. So I think that's a wonderful idea.
And then I guess my second point was a little bit following on Deanna's comment of the cart being put before the horse. Is there any possibility or discussion about postponing the effective date of the law from October 1st, 2016 to a later date so that some of these significant questions about compliance can be answered in a fashion and we don't have boards of education across the across Connecticut making their best stab at it?
No.
Is there any possibility of, I forgot.
They've had their special session. I don't know that the General Assembly is going to even meet before October. I forget when they start the new legislative session, but I'm not even aware of an opportunity for the governor signed the law, so he had no particular problem with it, and so he would, I think he's the only person who could seek to call the General Assembly into special session to address an issue, and this is not of that magnitude. We have these legitimate concerns, but I've heard nothing to suggest that October 1st is a date that won't be effective.
All right, well, so much for that idea.
That back to all we can do is our best and act in good faith to comply with the new requirements.
Sangeeta?
Yeah, complex and a lot of questions. What concerns me on this, and I know that as you're getting feedback from groups and such, the fact that you have a law, but there's no consequence if you don't follow the law as far as the operators. There's no penalties or anything. So we can agree to have a contractor, but then if they breach the contract, there's no recourse. And what I'm really concerned about too is that, we can have figure out the policy for how quickly we notify and follow the law, but what happens to the kids who have their students who have their information breached? Some information is kind of benign, other information might potentially affect their futures, whether it's a career, college, something or another.
Sure.
Again, you don't know where the data and what kind of data is being done. What is there in terms of telling the parent, once you say like, oh, there's been a breach, and then are we done and that's it? Is there, like when the health companies recently, when they had an issue with, like Anthem having their data broken into, there's so much hacking going on, they had these things where you can say, have plans for protection identity for 2 years, whatever,
Right.
do some kind of follow-up with that. Is there anything, again, like it's not the same kind of data, I'm not sure, but like I said, you don't know what these apps and other things are going to be asking in the future, so there should be some kind of talk about what happens when there is a breach.
That's a
Very it's not,
reasonable
it's just a concern.
point, and I don't disagree. One of the issues from a legal perspective is whether, and I'm not a litigator, but whether a parent in these circumstances could sue as a third-party beneficiary, because this contract that is created by obligation of law is to protect that student. So would that give the parent the option of suing as a third-party beneficiary, the operator? I think one of the other things to keep in mind is that this whole process, this law, imperfect though it may be, is raising this issue, raising the consciousness of this issue. And I think if I was going to say there's one goal of this law, it's not to figure out what to do about breaches, but to make this whole process so high in importance that operators are going to redouble their efforts, and the effect of this law will be to better preserve student data. Now, it's an imperfect world, and there will be breaches, and what happens then, you've raised a very good point. But I just wanted to make the larger point, and then the specific point is that this could give parents a right to sue under certain circumstances as a contract matter.
Penny?
Two more quick questions. One,
Sure.
any chance this is a uniform law that Connecticut adopted so that
No.
we can look at other districts?
No, in fact, one of the drafting issues, as my colleagues commented in the website, is that this is not a Connecticut issue. This is a national issue, and many states have data breach laws relative to student data. So what happened through the legislative process is a lot of different examples and samples were combined, and in the process of putting together the Connecticut law, they took pieces from different places, and some of these concerns that we hope and expect will be ironed out in the future will be addressed, but they could well come from taking pieces of different laws. There is no uniform law, but it's a uniform concern.
One
Yeah,
quick one?
yeah.
It's just that, should boards of education then, when looking at their contracts with these providers, also because of the unknown kind of consequences of various actions, also be analyzing indemnification provisions and insurance requirements in the event to protect the district and the town?
An excellent point. Just like the law creates a maximum of 30 days or a maximum of 60 days for reporting a breach, this is a matter for negotiation. And it's going to be very interesting to sit people down and, it's a kind of the old question, do we need them more or do they need us, in terms of our negotiating power? Because if we get carried away and say, we will not contract with you unless you do A, B, C, D, and E, some people are going to walk away. But business contracts, there's always argument about indemnification and insurance, and those will be legitimate concerns to discuss.
Sherry?
Hi. I just have two questions, one for you and actually one for Dr. Lutzy. But so the first one is just, I'm trying to get my head around the arena that you've described as student-found and used digital resources, because especially in the later years, in the course of any given research project, a student may on his own be accessing and using, a number of different online resources.
Sure.
So this law would only pertain to contracts that are entered into by the district? Would they relate to, that said information that the student is entering on his or her own, but, because
I can give you my best answer, and
Yeah.
there is some uncertainty in my own mind about it, but your question touches on this threshold issue of what contracts do we need to have, what contracts affect students, or what are students doing on their own.
Right.
But the bright line in my mind would be if a agent of the New Canaan Public Schools, read teacher, tells students, go use this resource, then we better have a contract with that resource. But this is that difference between student records and student information that's a new concept under this law. Students are going to share with that provider, that operator, student information, and these obligations pertain to that information, even though we don't have it maintained by the New Canaan Public Schools. Where we're going to have to be clear is between assigning and incurring this obligation, and students are going to do what they're going to do, and they're going to go out and use resources. And that was also that section I found that says this shouldn't be construed as imposing these obligations on internet websites, mobile applications that are designed and marketed to individuals. So students are going to use other resources in doing their work. It's going to be a challenge to draw the line and say, we need a contract with this group, we don't need a contract with that group.
Okay, so that's very helpful. And so then just relating that, the question for Dr. Lutzy is, so how, do we currently, how large is our current inventory of contracts, just to give us a size? And, how do we go about, who
Sure.
owns this internal process of now going about with that inventory and?
Right. And we've been reviewing that and looking at the process procedures, who owns it, where's the responsibility lie, and how do we sort of build this next level of checks and balances in. But fortunately, for the last few years, we have been including FERPA language in all of our contracts that discusses, it identifies this, that the school district owns the data, that the certain rights, the use of the data by whatever company we have contracts with. So we have been doing work already with our contracts to move them closer to what the law is requiring us to do, where I don't know, I think other districts may be further behind than that. So we've been working to renegotiate those. We are looking at all of our contracts now. We do have, they do come up, as Tom mentioned, kind of on a rolling basis. In the summer, we have some that come up. We'll have some in August, September, October, November. So we're continually, doing this work with our contracts. And the big ones like a Power School, like some of those others, IEP Direct, that's something that they're going to need to adapt in order to build it into the environment, and for them to stay in the marketplace. It is the smaller ones that I do worry about also, and that's where we're going to have to identify very clear procedures. If it's an app that a teacher is using for a research purpose for a single unit, that this is saying that if students create a login with a name and information, then we have to have a contract with that group. So sort of in a world where we do look for our teachers to be creative and to be identifying and using the sort of the most relevant, and oftentimes that's current information and technologies, we're going to need to make sure our system is in place to have contracts with vendors that currently we may not, because of, given the nature of the unit. So we have our arms around the large contracts and the big pieces. It's the smaller applications that we're we're sort of working through how we're going to manage it. Matt Salvastrini's here, and as our Director of Digital Learning, we certainly look to him to spearhead a lot of this work for us. And of course, Dr. Carenti is right on the cutting edge with it all, but it is going to be, it's a district-wide effort because it's a significant amount of oversight and follow-up on all of this. We're also going to be looking to Shipman and Goodwin for some help. The 10 provisions that have to be in the
Penny's
contracts. You what?
To Penny's
There you
point.
go. But as far as the contract language goes and the provisions that are required to be in those contracts, I think we'll probably get to a place where that's not a matter of negotiation around wordsmithing. It'll be similar to what we do now with our FERPA compliance and who owns the data and piece with our contract. We'll have a template that we'll insist is added into whatever contract we're part of. And then, we would expect them to be either adopting that language wholesale or in conversation with us, trying to make whatever slight adjustment needs to be based on the nature
If I
of that.
could just elaborate, and one of the further challenges is that a lot of what's available online is free.
Right.
And it may be, and this is a policy judgment, it may be better to tell people you can't use that if you can't get them to contract and agree to these terms. And that's the policy. What's worse, what's better, having access to it without the protection, or protecting students and educators from using unreliable resources? But if we're not paying for a particular application, I don't expect a warm reception when you go and say, we want you to agree to A, B, C, and D when you're giving us the free stuff. So it's a challenge. Was there another question?
Is that okay? It seems that the law is definitely more parent, students protective and more, it allows a lot of things to be more transparent to families. Do you think the obligations it puts on companies is greater than that of Board of Ed? And can the boards pass the requirements on to the companies? And do you think the companies will just start falling in line? Because, we're one of like 28 states or something now that's getting on board with this. So who do you think the obligation will be heavier for, the boards or the companies? And
I don't have a way of gauging that, but I think you make a good point that, and this is back to that earlier point, we have the issue of the breach, but we have the issue of how this law can affect the way we do business. And will it just elevate the practice and sensitize school districts and educators, as well as internet vendors? Will it sensitize everyone to the concern about student data privacy? All I can speak to is I personally think it has a greater impact on boards of education because of the scope of the responsibility. If I'm an internet provider, I just look at my business model and fix it if I'm not able to agree to the 10 required attestations. For the school district, it's a question of discovery to figure out who's using what and tracking down those vendors and then presenting to them the opportunity to continue. If not, then cutting them off and trying to find other vendors.
Hazel?
As we've gone through this discussion, Penny's mentioned about insurance. You mentioned about unfunded mandate. Does anybody have any idea how much money this will cost us? And we already have our budget in effect, and we're going to have to think about how to rearrange somehow to pay for any of the needs, or at least investigate if there have been other states or school systems that have put this kind of a law into effect. What did it cost, so that we can have any idea what's going to happen this year when I don't think you've been thinking ahead, and I know that you have, Jill, and everybody that's been thinking, but I'm not sure we discussed really fully how much this may be taking out of this next year's budget and future budgets. So I think it's something we need to think about and to prepare ourselves.
doesn't the legislature generally estimate costs of laws that they bring in? Do they kind of run it through how much will this law impact?
There's a requirement that the fiscal impact of laws be evaluated. From my experience, those estimates are not particularly reliable. But there is that. I mean, I forget one of the laws passed last year. They said this will have no impact because there's nothing you have to buy. You just have to do. And so that's the debate between, well, what does it cost to do? Well, they don't consider that a fiscal impact. It's more, what do you have to buy? So yes, it's something they're supposed to consider, and it'd be an interesting exercise to find out what the fiscal impact report of this particular law was. It's not attached to the Public Act, but we could find that.
Anyone else? Penny? No, it's all right.
So out of curiosity, just to avoid and to protect student privacy and to avoid some of the issues that arise until all of this is sorted out a little bit more, can the district come up with a protocol where if you use an app or a teacher directs somebody to use an app that requires a login, that we do it via an anonymous fashion? You know, teacher generates a random list of user logins and assigns it to students that stays within the district, doesn't go out to the provider, and gets used that way? I mean, it's a little bit cumbersome. I don't know. We had talked about that in another context at this board. I just don't know if we can do something like that until all of this stuff is sorted out.
Well, currently we have, we're generating our list of all the software and all the apps that we utilize in the system. That's step number one. And then we're going back and we're looking at the FERPA contracts that we currently have and that will be renewed and the timing in which they will be renewed. And we do have procedures in place for when staff want to utilize a new app. And/or a software. So we already have those procedures in place. I think the next big step is going to be coming in compliance with those other 10 factors that have been listed within this law, and creating our own team and creating our contracts and updating our website, and the questions that Tom is raising at this point seems to be some of the issues that we're going to have to address. Policies, procedures, administrative regulations that we're going to need to follow, I would see as some of our next steps. But we're currently going through all of the software, all of the apps, and we've been doing that for quite some time. And I have to say that there have been software over the last few years that we've said, thank you, but no thank you. We're no longer going to be using that software because you're not going to be FERPA compliant. Despite all that efforts that we've tried, we just can't come to agreement. And we've just chose to find another software that might do the same curriculum application that we need to have completed.
I just have going back to sort of the creation of this law. So we have a group, CABE, which is supposed to represent the boards of education with the legislatures. And so I'd kind of like, and maybe this is for Dr. Lutzy and Dr. Carenti and maybe you too, but when this was generated, how much of a voice did the boards of education have, or were they allowed to sort of highlight sort of some of these real issues in the creation of it, or was it really just, I just want to understand the process, because I think we constantly get into this problem where, it's a noble goal. Data privacy is a very noble goal. But, yet again, the legislator gets involved. They don't understand the costs of implementing those things and the impacts on boards of educations. And so, yet again, we're saddled with a lot of costs and administrative effort. And, if they'd really done the homework with the people that have to implement it up front, a lot of this, stuff could be eliminated. And I've seen it over and over again. I mean, the town has issues with unfunded mandates as well. And, it's a constant problem. We brought it up to our legislatures, but I guess because it's a quick process, we don't always get involved. So I just wanted to get your sense of how involved CABE was in this process. And really, you should have been consulted because they're representing us and you.
CABE does have a pretty consistent presence in Hartford. They're there, they're in part of the discussions, but they also have I don't say limited agenda, but they have a focused agenda on the issues that the most people feel would have the greatest impact on districts. I think they tend to be fiscal issues more that they get involved with, and probably at the request of districts that they consult with. This wasn't, I would almost say it wasn't on the radar coming through, but there's some discussion of it. I don't know that there was, it was up last year. It was also, there was a version of this that was being discussed last year. I don't think it was exactly written in the same way. So CABE's lobbyist is involved, and they are there, and they are interested for our feedback around certain things that they're doing. I think they will be able to help us going forward as we look at what the implementation of the law looks like. I think that it is, again, you started off by saying it's a noble goal, and I think it is. So I think it's the direction to move in, and the work for us will be to try to shape or reshape the legislation and our procedures so that it works for the benefit of students, as families, as we want it to do, but it's not so onerous on districts that it stymies or stifles creativity or growth or the good work that we're doing in classrooms. Tom, you're certainly welcome to.
Just a brief further comment. I think the appetite of legislators to get input varies widely among individual legislators and on the topic. On this particular topic, I think the devil is in the details because we're all supportive of the premise. So it wasn't like a premise that was on the table, go, oh no, we can't live with that. Everyone was interested in protecting student data privacy. And so now some of these very specific concerns that we have, who knows when that language, because, they can amend a law on the floor. I don't know the legislative history, but I think that these particular problems are because more that we all supported the concepts that were being discussed, and there was no red flashing light. We have a big problem here. And I just don't know when the final legislative language was adopted. But it really is not an objection to the premise, but really the implementation and the practical realities, like a task force after we have to do things, right?
Okay. Anyone else? All right. Thank you, Tom.
You're very welcome. I just wanted to say that I do apologize. I saw a couple typos in this thing I passed out, so I'm going to send a corrected version to Brian to distribute to the board. And what I also prepared, because this is in a context, in my guide, I have about 15 pages on student records pre this, about FERPA and how that all works. So I'll provide that to Brian as well. So I'm not saying you have to read it, but if anyone's interested in understanding more of the context, it'll be available. So thanks.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Okay. We're moving on to the action items section of the agenda, and the first item on our action items is the facilities usage rates second read. At our last meeting, we had the first read of the new rates, and so unfortunately, Brendan had a last-minute business engagement, so he was not able to be here. I thought, all that work he's done, and it'd be so nice for him to be here tonight. But I guess if there are any, let me open it up if there are any questions.
Well, and if you don't mind, I can refer you to, in front of you have a copy of the presentation from June. And just as a refresher, if you would like to turn that to the last page, page 9, those are the proposed revised changes with the bulleted information, kind of summative information on the right-hand side. and it does speak about how most of the users, when we look at the categories, Category 2 and 3A, that's where most users fall, and the thinking that was shared with us, with the board at the last meeting, was that in those categories, it'd be at 90% of the total cost as calculated out in the formulas. And Deanna, similarly, I want to commend Brendan for the good work that he did, and very thoughtfully and thoroughly built upon and worked with the work that Gene Goodman had done prior to really have a logic behind the rates, instead of looking and trying just sort of positioning them where we thought they should be, to really break it down into true costs and have a true logic behind the rates that then translated into the hourly costs. So we find that the proposal and the majority of our users would be relatively unaffected by this when we look at how it broke out. The Category 3B and Category 4, that 3B at 150% and Category 4 at 200%. If you go to pages 3 and 4 of the presentation, it describes who would fall into those categories, and it's really for-profit groups and other users that would fall into those groups. And again, as Brendan reminded us at our last meeting, that there is some discretion on the part of the superintendent as well for groups that don't neatly fall into one of the categories for a discussion to occur. So what we're looking for from the board this evening is for a vote to approve the rates as they were presented, which would then become an addendum to the policy that we have, and we would use those rates for the 16-17 school year. Again, with an understanding now that we have the formula broken out as far as true costs go, that there may be some slight fluctuation year to year as new numbers are plugged into the formulas based upon the total cost of ownership for on the buildings and the maintenance and operations of the building.
Dr.
Sangeeta.
Just a question on that. So once we amend this and with the rates and such, and I know that he's recommended that it be, upgraded annually, just depending on the fluctuations, do we need to go back and each year reapprove it, the rates, or?
Yes.
Okay.
We would, and we would just bring it to you at a meeting probably first meeting in July for review and approval. It would be using the same logic that that was presented in here and is all pretty clearly, very clearly presented, and then any discussion we'd want to have from there. And it's I think a good opportunity to just see where the rates are, and then we also would have a year of history with the use of those rates at each point to answer any questions, or, I think it'd be very informative for everyone.
Yeah, especially since it's a new thing, that it'd be nice to get the feedback to see how the users, thought it went, and, if there are some things that we missed or weren't aware of, that,
Right.
to reevaluate.
Yeah, I think it'd be very helpful. Yep.
Any other questions or comments before we vote? Okay. So all those in favor of the motion to approve as a second read the proposed New Canaan Public Schools facilities usage rates for 2016-2017 as first moved and seconded by Ms. West and Ms. Appel respectively on June 20th, 2016. All those in favor? Oh, all those in favor? Any opposed? Okay, the motion passes unanimously. Thank you, everybody. All right, moving on to the district goals. We will have our first read this evening from Dr. Lutzy and Dr.
And in no
Dr.
small
Correnti.
part, Dr. Correnti as well. Thank you. You have in front of you 2 copies of the district goals, the revised district goals, and the ones we're presenting tonight for 2016, 2017. One is a clean copy of the draft, and the other is the marked up copy. So I thought different preferences, different folks, so we wanted to share them with you both ways. And also it was shared electronically with you just prior to the meeting. As you know, our district, we work very carefully and thoughtfully on the district goals each year because they do help to shape our work as we go forward. They are generally continuations of the work that we've been doing through the years. The 5 large goals that we have remain consistent, and then it's the objectives that we use to work towards achieving those goals that change through the years as we progress in the work that we're doing. The first couple of pages of the document focus really on goal 1, which is increasing student learning as measured by multiple and varied assessment to assure all students graduate prepared for a dynamic and complex global society. We call that our student learning goal. And as you would anticipate as a Board of Education, that is where we place our greatest focus in the work that we do. All of our efforts, all of our work really is driven by our mission to work with our students, to help our students to achieve, to grow, to explore, to prepare them for what's next. So that's where the bulk of the work, the goals, the objectives are. Just if you'll indulge me just for a brief moment, just at the very top of the goals, you'll see kind of the summary of the purpose. District goals and evidence of student learning inform the development of our school, department, and individual annual growth plans that are finalized at the beginning of each school year, which is why it's important tonight for us to do this brief overview of the goals in anticipation of a longer dialogue together when we meet again in September. Annual objectives highlight priorities for the upcoming year, although the ongoing complex work of the district across all departments and domains continues, even if not specifically noted below, which is an important thing to share because we don't also want you to think that these goals need to be 30 pages long to include each and every little thing that we're doing as a district. We still continue to do the good work that we've been doing. We keep working in the areas that we believe we need to work. These are highlighted areas that we will be discussing together, agreeing upon together, but also that shapes the presentations and the work that the board does during its meeting times and the subcommittee meeting times. So as you see different objectives here as we go through them, you can anticipate that it will be formal presentations or reports or possibly in Friday notes and other things, other updates that will come to the board to share with you our progress towards these goals. So it's not only a way that sort of shapes our work and directs us in where we're going next year in these targeted ways, it also shapes the work of the board as we'll be presenting to you and working through subcommittees and other groups to continue this work. And of course, the goals and the statements therein do also come back to work to help us as we shape our budget for 17-18. And we develop our budget assumptions directly from our district goals that we're putting together. So the goals work at the very highest level, but then they do become operationalized at the building level, the department level, and ultimately in the classroom level through our administrative staff, through our educators, through the work that we're doing. So, Dr. Krenti, if you would like to begin in goal 1.
Sure.
And again, you can use either copy if you like. I don't believe we need to read through them line by line, but maybe we can talk a little bit about changes or updates and then answer any questions after each goal.
Certainly, thank you. So objective 1, you'll see that is a majority of the work that we're continuing to do in regards to making sure that we have the most up-to-date and current curriculum, and that we continue to provide those resources for the curriculum updates. We continue to work towards creating those common assessments that are dealing really with the depth of knowledge, that are really getting into that higher order thinking, that strategic way in which children problem solve. We're at the point now where we're doing a lot of curriculum writing right now at the high school level for English language arts, 9 through 12, creating those common assessments. That allows us to come back together and really calibrate and have meaningful conversations about students and their performance and what we do based on our instruction. We continue to do that really K through 12. Really, we're continuing to prepare our students for next generation assessments in all discipline areas, including world language, math, reading, all those core areas. And then obviously our expansion of children to engage in self-assessment and goal setting. As we move into objective number 2, where you'll see we're continuing our work here with the New Canaan High School graduation requirements. That we do have a graduation committee that has already been established, and we were working and making great strides in where we were going to go with our graduation requirements, and then it was delayed. And so now it will not impact until the class of 2022, which is, I think, current 6th graders. So it really gives the committee another year to really take a close look at where we want to go with our graduation requirements, where the state will be leading us in those graduation requirements, really taking a close look at some of the personalized learning, the course offerings that we're continuing to expand upon, whether they're in the STEM area or in some of the pathways that our students are taking. We know next year that we're going to engage in 3 new AP or college level courses. We're going to be moving forward, as you've heard from Jim Zambrano, with the AP Computer Science. We're also going to be offering AP Studio Art And we're also offering a senior English literature and film class, which will be college graduate courses for UConn. And then one of the courses that didn't run last year but will be running again next year is AP French. So we'll continue to keep you updated and report progress on those courses and the enrollment within those courses. We continue to look at the scheduling, certainly not only at the high school level, but certainly at the elementary and middle school as well, as we begin to have use within our SACS auditorium that may help us to make some changes into that SACS schedule, but it's really a revolving and something that we continue to look at every year. Even the implementation of STEM that you heard at one of the last board presentations, we had to make adjustments in schedules at the elementary level. So we're constantly looking at the schedule. And then certainly one of the big areas is continuing to meet the increasing needs of the student internship program. As you know, we went from 80 to 160 students over 1 year. And I think what's going to be really important here is really looking at the timeline. The children actually sign up for those internship programs usually during December and January. So it's going to be really important for us to really take a close look with the committee in September and October prior to hitting budget season to try to talk about what kinds of implications might this have on the budget if this continues to expand and to grow. So if we have 160 students now involved in the internship program and we skyrocket to 300 for next year, how do we continue to staff that and how do we continue to provide and give all those students the opportunity to participate in that program? Where you'll see some of the changes is within the STEM initiative, which is our science, technology, engineering, and math, and continuing to work at those state frameworks and looking at our local STEM initiatives. It's really the continue to research and implement all the programs that we've put in place for K through 8. And now we know that we've got 4 new courses that are being offered at the high school, so really closely looking at the implementation of the gaming class and the web design and all those that will be going in place for next year, closely monitoring and evaluating the progress towards those courses. We're continuing to, continue our vertical alignment and collaborate regularly and have our district committee in STEM. So where are the children from elementary moving into middle into high school, and how do we continue that vertical alignment? What's really important for us to start looking at are the next generation science standards. We probably need to have Melinda Meyer come back and really give us another in-depth conversation about what those next generation science standards are for grades K through 8. And how they're being implemented and integrated, and how we're making some revisions in the curriculum to address those next generation science standards. Where we're really continuing to research and design is really in those 9 through 12. You really haven't come out with what those clear standards are for content areas. What do the next generation science standards look like in chemistry, biology, or science? It's a little bit easier for them to identify in those general sciences. What does it look like for a 6th grader, a 4th grader, an 8th grader? But when you move into those content areas, what do those standards really look like? Christian Dockham, who's the department chair, is actively involved at the state level and continues to sit on that advisory board and continues to closely monitor that and keep us updated. I think we talked a lot last year about really doing a crosswalk between the national health standards and the Canaan Public Schools curriculum. We have identified some gap areas, and so now we're at a place where we really need to establish a timeline that includes some short and long-term goals. We really need to start looking at the curriculum and start to draft out some units following that understanding by design model that we use when we draft our curriculum. We know that we need to continually update the board and give you reviews, and we plan on doing that in the fall. So we'll kick off with something within the fall where we can give you an update of what we've done with our crosswalk, what we've looked at over the summer, and where our long and short-term goals will probably be as we move into the school year. We also want to be able to use that health curriculum as a way to help address some of the new state mandates. For example, like Aaron's Law, where we need to talk about sexual abuse awareness and prevention programs. The health curriculum seems like the right place to be putting that all in. And then I think it's also determining the best staff to help teach all of that. So at the elementary school level, it may not necessarily be a phys ed teacher. It might be a social worker or school psychologist who goes in and does some lessons with the classroom teacher. At the middle school, it could be very similar. So I think it's really opening up and taking a look at the health curriculum and really deciding who is owning certain parts of that health curriculum. Is it owned by the PE and health teacher? Is it owned by the general education teacher? Is it owned by the social worker? It's probably going to be owned by multiple people, and it's trying to figure that all out. And then certainly, continuing to evaluate all that staffing and what the best models of instruction will be and what the best practices are. As you look at number 5, the objective number 5, it's really moving into the conversations that we've had about preparing our students, technological knowledge and skills to succeed in that dynamic and complex global society. Really looking at the professional development that's not only provided to all staff, but really particularly to the 9th through 12th staff. So we have professional development planned for in August, and then moving into part of like faculty meetings and updates in November. So really mapping out a plan. And then I think it's really continuing to evaluate what is the transformation of learning look like? What does that look like? And how do we know that it's really meaningful for children? And that it's not just replacement, but it's really helping to transform their learning and the types of assignments that they're being requested to do. We want to continue to move forward with a district technology committee. We had a district technology committee that really helped do the research for X to 1, and now I think it's bringing that committee back together, probably including many general education staff within that committee, determining who should sit on that committee, and really establishing what a vision is and where our future is and where we want to go with our technology and integration within our curriculum. Once again, it's looking at the research of the best practices in library, media, and technology scheduling at the elementary schools, and looking at those learning commons district-wide. What does the future library look like? Is it the full-service learning, research, and project space to allow people to collaborate? Is the next phase of how we implement some of the curriculum a collaborative effort where you have the librarians and the technology teachers working with general educators and helping to implement and do that research right within that curriculum versus just an isolated curriculum. So it's really taking a look at those best practices. We're going to continue to monitor the implementation of digital citizenship. We've already made some adjustments, really taking a close look at that vertical alignment. I think what was most fascinating was we did a study group with kids at the end of the year in junior high and really talked with them about what they would like. And they really want time to talk about social media and really what does that mean and what does my digital footprint mean, and really having lots of conversations with their teachers in regards to that. That they found value in that session that they've been doing for the workshop block that we put into Sachs Middle School, but they had some great ideas and suggestions on where they would like to go, and things that they found repetitive. Things that they feel like, well, I've learned that really back in elementary school, and it's nice to hear again, but I'd really like to talk about it at a different level. So we really took into feedback. We've really been working on that during the summertime, and we'll continue to do that in August with rollout into the school year. We've talked a little bit about continuing that integration and expand that integration in grades K through 12, 9, 10, 11, 12. 9, it's already part of that experience, part of that health curriculum block that they have, but it's really that integration and making sure it's part of everybody understanding what they need to be teaching as far as digital citizenship. Continuing our online learning opportunities, and then certainly we had talked about looking at those learning management systems, the LMSs, and really exploring that and seeing where we want to go. RTI, I think where we're seeing some of the changes there is really the continuation of making sure that we're aligned as a district and that we're following our guidebook and the process that we've put into place. We want to continue to train our specialists in research-based interventions. So we've worked really hard at training some of our special education teachers in Orton-Gillingham, and now we've really expanded out to our reading specialists and getting them that training as well, because that's all part of RTI. We want to really exhaust general ed before we even begin to look at special education. We're going to continue to work really hard on the electronic platform that we've created through PowerSchool, which really helps staff with management of these plans, the Tier 1 plans, Tier 2 plans, Tier 3 plans that we have to implement. And then I think another area that's really come up is really researching math intervention models. There's a lot of research out there about the reading intervention models and what's considered best practices, but I think it's trying to explore those math interventions as well and where we want to go in that area. Not that we don't offer it, because we do offer it now, but it's always looking to see what does new research say about math interventions. Continuing to look at world language. And I think we really spent some time talking about where do we want to go when we try to say our children are graduating proficient in another language. And I think what we've had some good conversation about is, I think you remember Lizette presenting about all the different features of the apple and the apfel and that little triangular pyramid that we looked at. And I think we're getting at that point where we really want to look at the speaking component of the Apple assessment and really look at when kids take a level 5 French and Spanish class and a level 4 Mandarin, it's very hard for children to get to level 5. Are they truly developing, are they proficient in another language? And I think one way that we could probably assess that is through that Apple assessment and really see where those children perform. We currently give the students the Apple assessment in 8th grade, and we know that approximately where the students perform as 8th graders, but I think it's something that we need to continue to explore and analyze further, and also where do they go when they move into high school and how can we track their participation in the world languages. And it's kind of interesting when you look at the data, because I think Lizette shared at the board meeting that sometimes you have the 6th graders that say, I already know Spanish because I've been doing it since kindergarten, so I'm going to explore another language. But then what's interesting is many of them are going back to Spanish as a freshman, and they're picking up. We're also now are offering Latin 1 and French 1 at the high school. We have a new enrollment there. So we have other kids who may have sat in Spanish in 6th, 7th, and 8th grade, and now we're moving over to another language. So we really want to look at all of that participation and where we're going. And then I think what's really fascinating is continuing to expand all those opportunities in the world language. We do have a film and conversation speaking class, which is also UConn credit. And last year we only had 1 section. This year we have 3. So it's just talking about how this is very exciting for kids and how they're looking to grow. That's really it for goal number 1. I spoke very, very fast and very quickly, trying to give you as an overview, conscious of the time, but certainly happy to answer any questions on goal number 1, or we can move right into goal number 2.
Why don't we break it into goals?
Sure.
I think it'll be easier for people. Do people have questions tonight? I mean, we're just having the first read, and we just got it, but if there's anything tonight before we move into the second read next board meeting. Otherwise, we can move on. Penny?
I was just wondering if part of looking at the student internship program, which I think is a wonderful one, if you think we also need to look at the experience of the seniors that may remain in high school and decide for whatever good reason that they don't want to do an internship, to make certain that they don't feel that they're left behind and that they're having a good, meaningful, because with that big participation of 160 seniors, I think that provides some kind of fabulous opportunities for teachers to do great things with the students remaining.
Mm-hmm. And I think Sue Carroll talked a little bit about some of the experiences that they were doing for seniors this past spring, but I do think it's an area that we need to continue to explore and expand. And I think that's why we need to address this earlier on. I think what happens is that timeline kind of escapes us, and then we never imagine that the number's going to double. You know, when we had the 80 students, we never imagined it was going to go to 160. So I think now we recognize that each year it's pretty much doubled. So now we have to be prepared for if it does double again, what does that look like? And then I think you're right, what does it look like for the students who are remaining? And what kinds of experiences can we offer to them?
Right, so I don't know if we want to.
We can add something in. Mhm.
And then the only other thing I had was in the goals with respect to the world language. I think everything we put down there is terrific. Didn't know if we wanted to add something that we were going to continue to kind of analyze the performance. I mean, the first goal talks about the percentage of students, and I think you explained why we're looking at that, because students are shifting around. But in A through D, we're not really saying that we're continuing to analyze at all levels and make, the performance of the proficiency of the students taking these.
Right, I think what we've determined, and I, certainly for September 8th, I can print out that triangle and get that all to you again so that you understand what the different levels are. And I think that was a while ago that Lizette had presented that, so I will make sure that you get that again so that you look at it. And I think where we're leaning towards is when they take the assessment, they can do a written component, they can do a reading component, and they can do a speaking component. And I think what we're getting at is we really want to take a look at the speaking component. And basically, in looking at what some of our surrounding districts are choosing to use, a lot of them are leaning towards the speaking portion. So not that we're not going to look at the reading component or the written component, but I think it's looking at that speaking component, and then it's determining, is it going to be intermediate 1, is it intermediate 2, and I think that's where it'd be helpful to get that triangle back out to you so that you have a clear understanding of where we're going with that.
And I think one of the informative pieces to this is to look at the student performance in 8th grade and whatever language they've been in, and then to look at it again in that level 5, and really look for the growth along that continuum with the Actville proficiency triangle. And that's where the speaking piece comes in. So I agree. I think over time, this will continue to evolve. We've had this goal and these objectives in our district goals for a while, and I think that it has been informative along the way. And now, as again the students who've been with FLES for a longer period of time continue to move through our system, we're learning more and more about language study and progression, student interest, and trying to keep that program as sort of relevant and fresh for the students that we have in front of us at the time. So, yeah.
I just, to follow on Penny's comment on the languages, I just, there's nothing in here about the Latin performance, so I don't know what the thought was.
It's because it's a reading and written
Right.
piece, and so it's a matter of whether we want to add in a piece.
I was going to say, that
the
would be
reading
my
piece.
suggestion, is that
Sure.
you need to have something in there for a language that we're offering.
Yep, I agree. Thank you.
Any, Maria?
For section 4, since we're talking about a new state mandate related to Aaron's Law, which relates to sexual abuse, and a lot of information about sexuality that many parents cover with their children, is there a way we can, in advance of meeting this mandate and spending any kind of money on a plan and units, how can we engage parents in advance so we can see what we actually need to do to meet that?
I think you're absolutely right. I don't think we would ever just begin doing.
Oh, well, as a goal, it says create units. So I'm wondering, I guess that's the question then. At what point are parents brought into the program? Is there a vote on it? So before developing, it says begin to draft units of study. Oh, sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt, but just to
No, and those are
clarify.
drafts, and ultimately what we knew, we would come back to the Board of Education and give you the periodic updates and let you know where we're going and where we're moving towards that. I think as we move to looking at the future objectives too in communication, one of the areas that has been a goal of ours during the past year, and we're ready to start trying to roll out, is that whole curriculum website, and trying to get notification out to parents about what's going on in each of those areas. So I would almost envision that probably the first step in that health area would just be, what are the standards? So people understand what those standards are, what's the framework. So you start off with how you even go about developing that curriculum. And then as we move forward, it's presenting where we stand and putting it very similar to how you're seeing the math curriculum coming out on the district website, and you'll see the ELA curriculum. So it has those enduring understandings, but we've put it into very friendly user, so parents can clearly see what is it that the standard that we're addressing. But I would imagine that would be something we can do right at a Board of Education presentation and share with you where we are with the curriculum website. I can let all of you know when we're ready to unroll and get your feedback on it. But I would imagine that's where we start. What are the standards? How we go about addressing those standards? And this is going to be moving very slowly because whenever you're writing new curriculum, it takes time. And we're really trying to do a vertical alignment. So we'd be taking one of those standards and really taking a look at what the first standard is that we would want to address and how do we address it K-12. And so I'm imagining this is a 3 to 5 year process. That's going to take us to move forward with getting this curriculum to a place that we're all really comfortable with it.
Is there any thought about doing an assessment to see where families are on the issue, on the standards, on the instruction, so that you're coming in at the right place for every student's different? So how do you know what you teach in first grade works for every first grader?
I think we would probably approach this similar to how we would approach the design of any curriculum that we're writing. I think we go back to the standards. We look at what we do have a health curriculum in place right now, so it's determining what's the New Canaan Public School health curriculum, where are the standards, what are areas that are gaps, what are areas that may need to be revised, what are areas that may need to be addressed that aren't currently being addressed. And then it's always looking at developmentally. There are certain standards that aren't appropriate for kindergarten, other standards that are more appropriate for 8th graders. So it's really looking at where those standards are. It's researching what other districts are currently using as well as what we're using both, locally and nationally.
And I do think that that is an advantage to the way that we do this work, where we've been, and I think members of the board have been contacted by some external groups offering to meet the requirements of Aaron's Law, for instance. And we hesitate bringing in an external group and saying, okay, we can meet this mandate by having this group come and deliver their lessons to our students. Find that as an ineffectual way to approach things like this. What we try to do is really sort of take our time, understand it, and again, using Aaron's Law as an example, there are some elements in that are pretty prescriptive, things that we have to do. Other things that we can, that need to be adapted to our environment, to our students, to our families, so that we're meeting the needs of our kids. And that's how when we look at something like this, we try to do it as thoughtfully as we can for our community, for our students, for our schools, with our staff and our students and parents. So it does take longer because we do it in a way we're pulling communities together. Again, as Jill mentioned, we spent all of last year doing that crosswalk, looking at what our current curriculum is, what the standards are, what best practices are, and just sort of doing that as a way to understand where we are. But of course, as a health curriculum, we also understand how important communication is with this along the way. And using that curriculum website, which is coming up, I think will be one excellent way to do that, and providing opportunities, however they may be framed, for parents to provide feedback to us. We'll definitely be looking for that along the way as well. It's not something we're rushing. There are some deadlines, like there is a deadline for implementation of the requirements around Aaron's Law. There may be a few others, and we'll certainly meet those as we need to. But we do want to take our time and work through this methodically and purposefully, so that it's done correctly.
Is it possible to send the board the crosswalk so we can sort of see what falls, those of us that have had kids in the system, what's new? It might be easy to point out.
Sure. I think right now they're in the process of getting it all to a place where people can read it. It's lots of notes that the committee has scribbled on and written on. And so I know that's some of the work that they're going to be doing in the month of August. So as soon as that has been to a place where it's really at a point where it's readable, I'd be happy to share that all with you.
Yeah,
and I think it's a matter of bringing them back and doing a presentation for the public. So we do it at a Board of Ed, so people can actually see what the standards are, where we are with the New Canaan Public School curriculum, and be able to answer all the questions that you have.
Thank you.
Hazel? I was just thinking, I don't know if this is an appropriate place to put it, but we will be involving many, many staff members in the whole process of doing the implementation of the student data privacy law, and we're on a very short framework as far as time. Is this a place to focus that this is something that we're doing?
We have that actually mentioned in our communications, because as we looked through the law, we determined that a lot of it was about communication and putting the contracts online, communicating data breaches and things. So why don't we go to that?
That's I can wait, that's all right.
Okay.
Go
But it
ahead.
is part of Goal 2.
That's okay.
And it is one of the objectives within Goal 2.
Okay.
Anyone else before we move on? We have a few more. Okay, how do we move on to the next?
So certainly as you move into Goal 2, it's the communication, and it's really making sure that we want to communicate in a responsive, clear, timely, and inclusive manner. So it's, once again, this year we have a speaker that will be coming in. Last year we really took a look at that social media. This year we're really going to take a look at students' social, emotional well-being and its impact on students. And as we move into goal number 4, you'll see a collaborative effort that we're doing with the PTCs and the PFA on a speaker that we'd like to bring in November that will help to address that topic for parents and for staff. But that's an area that we're going to continue to focus on. I talked a little bit about the website already and the different venues and the communication of the K through 12 curriculum to all the stakeholders. So the math website kind of gives parents right now a little perspective of what it will look like with all those core areas. And so we're getting those onto school wires and hoping to get those out and ready for the start of the school year. And that's been a project that we've been working on all year. And then you'll certainly see the implementation and the policies and the procedures related to the recent student data privacy. And certainly, as you know, we were looking at budget implications, certainly a learning management system's a budget implication. Do we need to move to a mobile device management system? There's lots of things that we're going to need to look at. And so when we talk about budget and where we're going for the future, those are things that we will explore and take a look at and have further conversation with all of you.
Any quick questions on Goal 2 before we move on to Goal 3? Okay, Goal 3.
So Goal 3 is really moving into our professional practice and continuing to enhance teaching and extend our learning. And it's really continuing to look at our teacher evaluation and professional learning and how we're continuing to collaborate and making sure that we're all understanding our effective teaching framework, and we're all communicating and utilizing the same language with our framework. We continue to evaluate our plan yearly. We have a committee that meets regularly. We have conversations about it that not only deal with where we're going for professional growth for all staff, but also goes back into both our leader and teacher evaluation system. This year, we did a lot of coaching with our K through 8 coordinators and our reading, writing, and math specialists, and we really want to continue that coaching training that we've been providing to staff and really include others in that area as we move forward next year. It might include department chairs, it might include even tech integrators or library media people that are really out there doing coaching and professional development with staff. And then it's our continued work with professional learning communities, which really help us to look at data, analyze the data, help to inform instruction, and help us to move forward with our best practices.
Okay. Any questions on Goal 3? Pen?
Just one minor comment. I can't think of a different curve. I just wonder under Goal 3, objective number 1, where it says implement the teacher evaluation professional learning program. It's implement, right?
We've already implemented, so it's probably monitor.
It's monitor.
Monitor, evaluate, yeah.
It's not quite active enough,
Yep.
so I just suggest a slightly different.
It's almost like a word like leverage or something,
Leverage.
right? It's
Yeah, leverage.
to use it to your advantage in
It's a
some way
great
because
tool.
it's,
Yes,
yeah,
exactly.
yeah.
Yeah, good point.
So we'll
Great
work
suggestion,
with
thank
that.
you for
Yeah.
the work on that.
That is a great suggestion. Okay. Any others? Okay, Goal 4.
Goal 4 is really looking at to promote an environment that fosters respect, ethical behavior, and responsible global citizenship. So it's our use of our K-12 SAPL, our social, academic, personal framework that really guides our work for our school climate and our safety issues. It's really continuing the work that all of you have begun. And I think you've seen countless presentations on school climate and where we're going to be going for next steps. So it's continuing all of that. It's working with our new school climate coordinator and bringing her up to speed and continuing to provide training to all those school teams. And Darlene, you can feel free to jump in at any time if I'm not explaining these. Just moving a mile a minute here. And certainly continuing to expand our school climate initiatives, continuing to have parent and community education sessions where we're really talking about our school climate plans and be consistent with our district crisis and climate. Continuing to implement the Connections program at the high school, which took over the advisory, which was very successful last year, where we actually had lessons that all of the teachers who were running those Connections classes were able to utilize. We continue to expand those lessons, revise those lessons so that we have new material as we're moving into the upcoming year. I already talked about the collaborative effort of bringing in a speaker and really hosting a program for staff and parents in the community on the topic of student social emotional well-being. And then obviously it's to continue to expand and promote opportunities for students to engage as productive and responsible citizens in and out of school. And then as we move into objective 2, it's really continuing to update the safety and the security plans and the practices and continuing to do all the good work that we currently do with all of the town officials. And then it's continuing to implement the safety plans at each of the schools and updating that and making sure that we're in compliance with the state because we submit all those plans to the state in the fall.
Okay, great. Any questions from the board? Okay, moving on. Goal 5.
Brian or Joanne, you want to take goal 5? You want me to keep going?
Oh, Jill, you were doing so well. All right. I'm glad to. Goal 5 is our stewardship goal. Of course, we are always looking to promote and practice good stewardship for all of the district resources in a manner that supports safe and healthy environments and optimizes our student learning. As I think you'll attest, we had a successful and I think very productive budget season last year with the town bodies and the different groups. Joanne's first year, last year as we worked through. And really we've been working hard and successfully, I believe, developing positive, productive working relationships with all members of the town bodies. And we certainly appreciate and respect the great work that they do. And I think they feel the same way. So in our stewardship of our resources here, we're going to continue speaking with them around how can we streamline the budget process itself. That's number of meetings and length of duration of meetings. We'll continue that conversation. I think in part we're in a wonderful place to continue the conversation because of the feedback we received about the clarity of our budget document and presentations last year. Stewardship also includes our facilities and taking good care of the buildings that we use each and every day. So it's to continue to look at our facility survey that was conducted a few years back and to be sure that we are appropriately and accurately putting forward requests for the building needs to the town, to the Board of Selectmen and other town bodies to be sure that they're aware of the needs in advance, hopefully, and are able to work with us in support of keeping them up to date, keeping them effective for our needs. Always we'll have to keep an eye on our enrollments as Gary shared with us earlier tonight, and we always keep a close eye on that. Now we'll continue with our periodic updates to the Board of Education. As a matter of fact, our first meeting in September will include a capital facilities update to go over the work we've done over the summer and where we are going into the new year. It was nice to strike a few things off of the list of the periodic updates as we complete them. So we take off the south windows, Saks Auditorium remediation, the tech infrastructure, but certainly anticipate that the Saks building project will be a topic of frequent conversation for the board, and certainly go into the detail about the other projects that we're doing. And then, the last is to continue working collaboratively with the town. We've begun just recently through Gary and Cheryl's collaboration to work with the town around a system that we use for background checks for all of our employees. That's both an efficiency that we're able to share and effective best practice that we're able to share with them. And I know we're also continuously in conversation with members of the town around, are there ways that we can work together for the benefit of all? And we're going to continue those conversations and continue with the relationships that we've been developing through the years with them.
Any questions? Penny?
I just had one area I didn't see addressed, and this board took a deep dive in kind of guidance department and preparation of students for college and other postgraduate activities. And I was just wondering, there are no goals kind of addressing that. It's something the district does, but I just wonder, I don't want to suggest anything because I haven't thought about it that much recently, but if we should have some sort of goal in this ever kind of competitive and changing process, that we ought to look for best practices or analyze it or do more initiatives or something like that, because it has been about kind of 6 years since we really took a deep dive into it. So,
yeah, and actually
what would
the group
be-
has been looking at it very carefully, and they're in the process of developing presentations for the board in the fall, both the K-8 structure and the 9 through 12 structure that Darlene's been working through. So I agree. I think that's an appropriate goal because we will be learning some things through those presentations that then may lead us to some different decisions and different approach, whatever it may be. So I think that's a good catch. I think we will add something in around that if the rest of the board agrees.
I agree. I wanted to add one, or have a question actually about Objective 2 on this and the capital of the projects. And I noticed we took out the technology infrastructure and replaced it, or just put in the building capital and maintenance projects. With sort of the BYOD being rolled out to the entire high school, and there were some conversations with Matt's presentation about, sort of needing to sort of bolster that a bit for that program. If we could, I don't know if we want to just make sure that we don't lose sight of that in our building capital, because that kind of is, but I want to make it a focus that we probably should have a relook at how we're doing this next year, because I think it's an important thing. I mean, it'll be part of the BYOD, but I think it's...
Yeah, no, and that's easy to do. You're right, it would be part of the BYOD, but it's also one of those things, the technology is changing so rapidly that it is something that can always warrant an update around, are we meeting the needs, is our capacity enough for what's happening in the classroom? So, it's funny, people predicted years ago that things would go video and streaming video and all of that. We all we knew it was coming, but the infrastructure in many places didn't keep up with that, even that kind of change, because the bandwidth requirements are so great. So, yeah, it's something that we can keep an eye on, and we could certainly keep it on the list. We may change it a little, because this was specifically for the technology infrastructure programs we did over the summer, where we had the high school, middle school, then did the 3 elementary schools the following year. So we may just change the language a little bit, but the focus would be the same.
Okay.
It's a good idea.
Thank you. Maria?
I'm not really sure how you could do this. Hazel kind of mentioned the mandates before, but is there any way to integrate somehow a process that allows us to extrapolate mandates and their cost and sort of understand, for example, we don't need as much social emotional instruction maybe in New Canaan as you might need in a town where there's less support. Is there any way to integrate that under district resources? Sort of trying to get a handle on all these unfunded mandates and what amount of effort we need to make on them, where we can minimize,
Sure.
where we can have efficiencies.
So it's language around something like identifying the mandates, unfunded mandates that impact the school system, and attempt to quantify their
And
impact
evaluate
or something along those lines. Okay.
Or
we can-
balance, a way, somewhere where you have a balance in there. If it's needed, we do it. If it isn't, that could be an efficiency where you can scale back.
We can try to work with some language around that somehow. I think certainly identifying what the unfunded mandates
Right.
are in an educational space, what we're looking at, what we're dealing with each year, and then trying to ascertain what that might mean.
Right.
We can try to develop something. Yeah, we'll work on some language. Okay.
Sure.
But I would just suggest that we're clear on what the goal is before we work on the language. Like, I hear what you're saying, and so I guess the end goal would be what, to be able to communicate that back to state legislators?
To find efficiencies where you maybe don't need as much of something where, they're all one-size-fits-all mandates, basically, as far as I know.
But I think my understanding is that we currently have a process whereby we are efficiently applying and, we're compliant with what, is prescribed. And then for the parts that are not, we're, have an efficient process to analyze and, strategically apply what works for us.
No, you're right. Actually, it actually comes out of UConn. There's a piece that's called, high leverage policy approach, where when we look at mandates, things that come down from Hartford, we look at those, at how it's written, and then we look for how it can be best leveraged in our environment so that it builds upon what work we're currently doing and doesn't sort of take us off track of the work that we are doing. Our direction, our goals, our vision, our purpose. So we are very purposeful in how we implement the things that we have to implement, because we want to make sure that it's done in alignment with our values and our beliefs and what we're doing. So I'm forgetting right now the sort of the author of that kind of framework, but we use that framework to implement the mandates and things as they come down, so that we do it in a consistent way. Because if without doing that, without finding that coherence between your current practice and mandates and things that come down, then what happens is everything is very disjointed. And teachers and parents and students feel like they're sort of always moving in different directions. They don't know what's coming next. And what you want to do as a district, and I think one of the things we've done very well through the years, is to develop a sense, like sort of a rhythm and a purpose and that vision and direction, and make sure that we'll do what we have to do, but we won't do it in a way that ever takes us off course for what our beliefs are, what our values are, and kind of what our goals are. As far as identifying the unfunded mandates, I know that's an exercise that several districts have been engaged in through the years, sort of breaking them out. And it can be everything from the things that need to be taught in the schools, to use of pesticides, to if we had a swimming pool, there's a mandate around sort of lifeguarding and things. There's all different pieces, in a school environment that, large and small, that can impact school districts. I guess the thing by its nature as a mandate, there's sort of how we implement those mandates. Again, we do it in that high leverage way, but rarely do we have an option to not do anything around that because of that's why it's a mandate, right? We're sort of mandated to do certain things. So
I guess what I'm hearing, though, is like Maria's suggestion, maybe more of an agenda item to update the board on that process and kind of, a rundown of the unfunded maintenance versus adding, versus a new goal, is what I'm hearing. Because it sounds like you're already doing that.
We do. Yeah, and happy to sort of sit together with the group and talk about and work through kind of what those unfunded mandates and others look like for us, and then see if there's a next step to that or not. I think that's probably a good place to start. Okay.
Anyone else?
Okay, thank you.
Okay. All right, since we've gotten through the entire goals, if we could...
In record time.
In record time.
In anticipation of longer discussion in September.
Yes, and as always, I think the way we've done this in the past is that if you have specific comments on the goals between now and our September, oh Lord, when is our next meeting? September 6th? If you have comments on these goals, if you can forward them to Dr. Letzi and, with a copy to me, that would be great. And, we can bring those in forward to discussion at the next meeting. So at this point, if I could get a motion to approve as a first read the district goals for 2016-17. Penny?
So moved.
Second? Sangeeta. And that's all we need?
Yep, that's
Thank you. Moving on, we have a West PTC President's Grant donation. In your packet of information you received tonight, I think there's a letter from the PFA or PTC presidents about a donation for the media center. Do you want to?
I'll just briefly say, although we haven't approved the goals yet, we're already working towards them. This is one of our goals around developing the Learning Commons model in our schools. As you know, the West PTC has been focused on culture, right? And with the tables for the cafeteria that they purchased, and they're thinking about kind of what can we do in the library media center to help move it towards that Learning Commons. It is about, one of the steps of Learning Commons is about creating the collaborative space, and so they're looking to change some of the furniture in there to do that. We'll be looking, actually, Bill Egan and I were talking today. I think the PFA at the high school is looking similarly to do some fundraising around their library for a similar purpose, and some tables and things that create more collaborative spaces for students. So I think that we'll see more folks moving in this direction as well.
So if I could get a motion to approve a donation from the West School PTC Principals Grant in the amount of $7,178 for new tables and chairs for the Media Center. Tom, second. Sherry, any discussion?
Actually, I had one suggestion. It's great to see, Dr. Letsy, that the PTC at the high school is also thinking of this. I know that you have discussions with all the groups and stuff. It'd be great to kind of mention it, kind of, so that all the schools are kind of coming up together.
Yep, glad to.
Okay. Any further discussion? All right. All those in favor of a motion on the table? Any opposed? Okay, motion's unanimous. All right, moving on to the consent agenda. You have before you a number of items on the consent agenda. Could I get a motion to approve the consent agenda? Hazel, second. Jen, all those in, any
Could
discussion?
I make one comment?
Yes.
I just noticed here that Mr. Veslige is moving on.
know.
And I just, we typically, teachers that have had such a huge impact on students, they leave when they're retiring. He's leaving a little bit earlier. And so I don't know if Dr. Letsy was planning to say anything, but I just wanted to recognize the many years of fine service that he'd given to this district and everybody he's taught. He was the AP Government and Political Science teacher, and I know so many students adored that class and really learned a lot that helped them as they continued on in life. He's been an inspiration and done incredible service for the school. He was selected by the students a few years back to give a very compelling graduation speech, in which I remember he said, listen to your life. And I guess what he's doing is he's listening on to his life, and he's moving on to kind of new goals and still going to be in the area. And I just wish him all the best in his new endeavors.
That's tough to follow, Penny, but I will just share, I'll echo your sentiments. I will share that Steve is going on to new opportunities. He's getting into more of an administrative position, and he's very excited about that. But the moment I heard, I did get in touch with him right away and really thank him for just the outstanding service he's done. As principal of the high school, Steve was actually elected twice by the students to speak at graduation, which wasn't really supposed to happen. And when we went back to the students and said, well, Mr. Veslige has done it recently, and we need to pick somebody else, they said, no. It's our graduation. We really, really want him. And I guess maybe I was a softie, but I gave in, and and he did a wonderful job. And Steve is somebody he came to us with a legal background, and just a great person, and someone who the students really connected with very well. It's a very desirable position, and we are happy with our new teacher for AP, GoPo, and we're confident in that program moving forward. But we are going to miss Steve, and he meant a lot to all of us, students and staff, parents alike. So, yeah.
Okay, any further discussion? All right, seeing none, so wait, did I, just a vote. All that discussion, I got lost where we were. So all those in favor? opposed? Okay, thank you. All right, we are now back to comments from the public. Is there anyone who would like to speak? Nope. Then we move into announcements and future business. Dr. Letzi?
Yes, and I'll be brief, but I do want to just very quickly share with you the work that's going on in Dunning Stadium. They began today removing the existing field, and that will take approximately 4 days. And then they'll be doing grading and base work over in the field. They'll begin to deliver the new turf August 3rd, and it'll take about 21 days for the new turf to be fully installed. This work is all being funded through private donations. It's been shared with the Board of Selectmen and other town bodies. But really, it's something that needed to happen. Our field was, needed to be replaced. You know, they have lifespans, and I know Mr. Egan shared with us when Jay came earlier some of the things that they were looking at doing. But one of the things that he pursued that I wanted to share with you is the recycling program that the company we're using to replace the turf is a part of. And without reading through a whole bunch of information, I think suffice it to say, the turf itself will be collected. It will be shipped to Malaysia, where it will become brand new materials. It will be turned into different post-consumer products such as posts, planks, irrigation drip pipes, lumber, other things that will be used in all around the world. And by doing that, we make sure it doesn't wind up in a landfill somewhere for the next 1,000, 2,000 years. I think that was something that's, again, was important to Jay in doing his research. I just think it's something worth sharing with the board around sort of that question, where does it go? Well, it goes to Malaysia, and then it becomes something else that's useful and is good for society. So I thought that was a good thing to share. I also just want to share, we have an audit committee meeting tomorrow evening that Dr. Keating and I will be attending, and then another meeting on Wednesday evening with the town council, where we'll be talking briefly about the insurance, and there'll also be a SACS update at that meeting as well. At our next meeting, which is not until September 6th, given the schedules, we will be looking again, revisiting the proposed changes to the bylaws that the Board of Ed's been discussing. We'll have a capital projects update, as I mentioned, the K-8 guidance update, whether that meeting or the next, we have to determine once we have a chance to speak with the counselors a little bit more. I know they've been working, I think, towards that date, so I just want to check in with them. As we do annually, we'll have our opening of school report by our principals, facilities report, end of the year, unaudited financial report, and we'll have our second read of the district goals. That is the Tuesday after Labor Day. So it is not a Monday night meeting as we typically have, but it is the Tuesday after Labor Day that we'll be meeting. And then a few days later, on the 8th, we have scheduled a Board of Education workshop where we'll be talking with Jonathan Costa about a couple of different things.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you. So we've now moved into the point, if I could get a motion to adjourn to executive session in accordance with Connecticut General Statutes 1-225A. The subject to be discussed is collective bargaining, records, reports, statements of strategy, or negotiations with respect to collective bargaining. May I have a motion to adjourn to executive session? Sherry. Second. Jen. All those in favor? Any opposed? Okay. Thank you.